What is the scariest encounter with another human you have ever experienced? When I was 15, I was regularly at home by myself since both of my parents worked full-time and my brother had moved away to college. Well, one day during the summer, I was just relaxing at home when all of a sudden someone knocked on the front door. I got up and checked the peephole and saw two guys just standing in the driveway, just off the porch. One of them was wearing a suit, the other wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, but facing away from the house like he was playing lookout. I decided to ignore them, because they'd go away, right? Wrong. They continued knocking, but getting progressively louder and more aggressive. Finally, I decided to call the sheriff's department and ask for a non-emergency check since they were trespassing. My dumbass decided to yell through the door that I had called, and before I could even realize how dumb it was, the guy started kicking the front door. I freaked the hell out, ran back toward the center of the house, and realized that there was a third guy trying to kick in the back door as well. At this point, I called 911 and started screaming about these three guys trying to break into my house. Notoriously, it took the sheriff's deputies longer to get there than anyone would imagine, and they saw the guys walking down the road later. They stopped them to question them, but there was no arrest. In 2012, I was just north of Irwin, Tennessee, while through hiking the Appalachian Trail in the Roan Mountain area. While at our campsite, maybe 25 yards off a dirt forest trail, a blue F-150 pulled up and a man got out and said he was an undercover forest ranger. He said there had been a lot of kids causing trouble up around these parts and asked if we had any guns or drugs. It was myself and another older gentleman from New Orleans who also said he was through hiking, and two off-duty Coast Guard who were making a weekend hiking trip together. Before that evening, none of us had ever met. We discussed it and decided that the guy was fairly creepy and decided to split up and scout out a replacement place to camp. We agreed to each hike for 15 minutes north and south, then come back and report if there was a more suitable spot where we were away from the road and the guy would have a harder time finding us. After our little recon trip, we came back and decided there really was nothing all that suitable and decided to just push our tents a little deeper into the woods so as not to be spotted as easily. Around 9 p.m., everyone was in bed and asleep or nearly. 3 gunshots rang out, and they were not off in the distance. In less than 5 minutes, a truck came screaming down the path with the high beams on, and the same guy from earlier got out, brandishing a Glock with an extended magazine. He was hysterical and told everyone to get out of their tents and on the ground. For the next nearly 45 minutes, he kept up the charade that he was an undercover game warden and/or fish and wildlife person. The story would change. After a few minutes into the ordeal, it was fairly obvious he was unstable or on something. That didn't change the fact that he had a gun pointed at us. He would repeat the same lines over and over. He would ask if we had guns, drugs, or money, then yell things like, "You don't have cash. How will you survive out here?" This was followed by, "I'm just trying to keep you guys safe." Then he would get paranoid and say, "There's 4 of you and 1 of me, you're going to try and jump me," while swinging the gun around wildly. This whole cycle would usually last 6 to 8 minutes at a time, and for nearly the entire 45 minutes, we were either lying on our stomachs or on our knees. Fairly early on, the guy from New Orleans jumped up and ran into the woods. I found out later he had a cell phone, and called the police. They said it would take them about 45 minutes to make it out to the woods and to hold tight. Of course, I didn't know any of this, and more importantly, the guy holding us up lost his mind. The undercover man shouted into the woods and said that if the guy from New Orleans didn't come back, the rest of us would be sorry. The guy actually came back. Seriously, he didn't know any of us, and even today, I genuinely don't believe if I were in his shoes I would have walked back into that situation. It's the bravest thing I've ever seen someone do. The situation ended when the man demanded to search our backpacks for the aforementioned drugs, guns, or money. He was kind of easing into his, just trying to keep us safe, stage. He leaned down to search my backpack, and the 2 Coast Guard guys jumped up simultaneously and tackled him. I knocked the gun out of his hand, quickly dropped the magazine, and discovered that there had been a live round in the chamber the whole time. We tied the guy up and waited for the police, who showed up about 20 minutes later. I was incredulous that their response was essentially, "Oh, that's just crazy John, he's really done it this time." And, "Oh John, they would have been within their rights to shoot you dead." For the record, his name wasn't John, but it was very generic sounding. Here's the best part of the story. There were obviously empty bottles of liquor, a film canister with some crushed something in it, and a cell phone with 14 missed calls from his apparent son. While this was being searched, it was explained to me that he was a former minister who got struck by lightning and became a pill popper and kooky ever since. He was known for messing with people but never to that degree before. I ended up finishing my through hike, but that was, without a doubt, the scariest thing that happened while I was doing it. In the late 80s, I was running errands in town with my mum and 2 sisters. Back then it wasn't uncommon to leave your kids in the car while you ran inside the store. We were sitting in the car waiting, and then I saw an older guy walking towards our car. I just got a really bad feeling and started yelling at my sisters to lock the doors, while I locked the 2 on my side. He came over and spent the next couple of minutes trying to open all the doors on the car while we were cowering in our seats. Eventually, he gave up and left. We were all 8 and under at the time. I just knew that if he got in the car, he would take one of us. In our mid-20s, my husband and I lived in a townhome without a yard in a pretty nice area of town. We knew we were purchasing a house soon, so we went ahead and got our first puppy. I'm a morning person, while my husband is not, so I would usually get up around 5 a.m. and take the puppy out to the little patch of grass across the street from our townhome, still inside the entire complex, mind you. I did this for several months, no big deal. Well, one morning while I was out waiting on the puppy, an old Ford van, all beat up with no windows, slowly drove by and went back behind another building. A few minutes later, as I was getting ready to cross the street and go back inside, the van came back up the road to where I was getting ready to cross, stopped in the middle of the road, and turned off its lights. I waved them on in front of me, and at that point, both doors of the van started to open. All I remember was seeing someone start to get out before both the dog and I felt the undeniable urge to run across the street and inside as fast as possible. Once inside, the van sped off and disappeared. The creepiest part of this whole thing was when I went upstairs to wake my husband, only to find out he was in the middle of a dream where I'd been kidnapped. To this day, I refuse to run outside or go on walks alone, even on our quiet country roads. And big old vans still creep me out. I was about 14 or 15. School had just ended, so the bus home was packed with other school kids. We were a couple of stops away from where everyone got on when this guy with a huge jacket, hood up, and mask on, we were in the middle of a heat wave, so it was super odd, got on the bus, stormed upstairs past me and my friends, and threw down this huge bag he was carrying. He screamed, "This is a bomb," and ran off the bus. It took everyone a few seconds to process what had just happened, but after those few seconds, I experienced the craziest panic I've ever seen. Everyone bolted downstairs and tried to get out, but the doors were closed. I remember this huge dude just punched the glass out of the door like it was nothing, and people were just dragging themselves through it. When I got to the door, I hit the emergency release to make it easier to jump off. Once we were out, we sprinted at least 500 meters down the road and crouched for the explosion. Except there was no explosion. It was just a hoax. It turns out that the guy who did it was someone from my school who had previously been expelled. I was walking through campus after a night class, around 9 or 9:30 p.m. It's a big campus and was pretty empty at this point. The shuttle I took was at the other end of campus, so it was a pretty long walk. At one point, I was walking through a swampy area with a raised boardwalk. There were 2 girls a ways ahead of me walking together, and I saw them reach the end of the boardwalk and go into the next building. As I reached the end of the boardwalk, this guy kind of hopped up out of the surrounding woods. He took my hand and started telling me how beautiful I was, asking me my name, what year I was at uni, what I was doing that night, and where I lived. I asked him why he wanted to know, and he said, "I'm taking a survey." I was literally in such shock that it took me a second to realize he was even touching me and had my hand. Everything he was asking me sounded really inauthentic and like it was scripted, like he was in a rush to get it all out. He also had this really weird, unsettling vibe that he was giving off that instantly freaked me out, but it was dark outside, and I was all alone at this point. Thankfully, a minute or 2 later a guy walked out of the building, and I used that moment to break my hand away from the weirdo and tell him, "I have to go." I've never walked so fast to my shuttle, looking over my shoulder the whole time. I couldn't stop shaking the whole ride home. Something about that guy was off, and I was sure if that man hadn't come out when he did, something bad would have happened to me. Exactly what, I don't want to think about. Keep in mind there had been a group of 2 girls walking ahead of me, and he hadn't approached them. He was looking for a girl by herself. When I was 13, I had just been dropped off by the school bus, so I had a bit of a walk home. As I got close to the corner of my street, some guy in a dark blue car rolled up and asked where I was headed. Told him I was going home. The guy then excruciatingly slowed his car down to match my walk and asked if I wanted a ride home. I told him no thanks, I'm almost home. Then he continued to ask where I lived and if I still wanted a ride home. Luckily, I had a phone at this age, and I pulled out my Nokia phone, I don't know why I remember this, and pretended to call my mom. She wouldn't have picked up the phone and I was almost home. The guy saw what I was doing and sped off like crazy. From the age of 13, I started carrying pepper spray. This happened when I was about 9 or 10. It was around 8:30 on a Tuesday or Thursday. My parents and I were watching TV when there was a knock at the door. My dad got up and answered it to see a man standing there, with a white van behind him. He looked like he was in his early 30s. My dad went outside to talk to him as I hid behind the TV stand and waited for him to leave. It was hard for me to hear what they were saying, but I could hear my dad say, "No thanks," and "We're good." When my dad got back inside, I saw the van leave and asked my dad what had happened. The guy had asked him if he could come inside to do a security system estimate because he was a door-to-door salesman. My dad said he could see a bunch of other guys inside the van staring at them. When they left, my mom called the neighbor to ask her what was going on. Apparently, they had asked almost everyone on our street the same question. My neighbor called the police and started to follow the van. The guys caught on, and when my neighbor turned around to go home, they started following her. She eventually lost them, but the whole ordeal was still scary nonetheless. I know about my neighbor following them and being followed because my mom was on the phone with her the whole time. I was up in my third-floor bedroom, listening to music with my headphones on after having just smoked, when I started to hear weird noises. Naturally, I just thought it was because I was high, but it was weird enough for me to take my headphones off. I listened for a bit and heard a creepy voice I didn't recognize coming from downstairs, mixed in with my housemate John's voice, but he sounded like he was in pain. I was like, what the heck, so I started walking slowly down my stairs. I looked into his room and saw John on his floor, holding his eyes in pain, while a big dude in a hoodie was shouting at him and grabbing things off the shelves. The next thing I knew, autopilot had kicked in. I ran towards the room, and the hooded dude turned and ran for the door. I smashed into him, sending us both tumbling down the staircase, trying to exchange punches on the way down. We scuffled a bit in the hallway until he eventually ran out the door. It turned out that John, who was on crutches at the time, was hobbling home and went to open our front door when the hooded dude came up behind him and pepper sprayed him in the face, blinding him. He then took him up to his bedroom to rob him of his stuff. The poor guy had to have iPads on for the next 2 days. Anyway, it was all pretty messed up, but John was okay in the end. Honestly, I was so out of it that it didn't really feel like it was happening at the time. It was like a bad trip. We all moved out 2 weeks later. This was in Brixton, London. My cousin, who was like 14, was babysitting us, 9-year-old me, 4-year-old brother. Her dad called, coming down from I want to say crack, heroin, I don't know, something really bad. He called and screamed at her to tell him where her piggy bank was. She told him to get lost and hung up. He called back, she didn't pick up, and he left a voice message which played as he was leaving it. It basically said he was going to come over and take all of our lives with a knife. He was full of it, but we were terrified. Can you imagine the pure fear a 9-year-old feels when a grown man who sounds crazy says he's going to end her life with a knife? So we prepared. We blocked out the windows, locked everything, and put heavy furniture in front of the doors. My brother was asleep in his room. My cousin told me to just leave him, but I couldn't stand the thought of him being alone in there, so I did a covert-style belly crawl, heart beating out of my chest, across the kitchen, through the living room to his room, scooped him up, and brought him back to my mom's room, which we then barricaded ourselves into. I got no sleep that night, and my mom and my aunt came back the next morning like, what the heck did you kids do? But I was honestly just happy to be alive and that my mom was home again. The worst part of the whole thing is when she got home, her dad had sold all of her belongings. I mean everything. Her bed, her dresser, TV, it was all gone. It was just an empty room. He's clean now, but I still hate his guts. Screw you, Uncle Donald. When I was 8, my little sister, who was only 5, and I had a lemonade stand in our apartment complex. We had made probably $15, which we were just keeping in a little Tupperware container. All of a sudden, some 17 or 18-year-old punks came over and stood over our table laughing at us. We were just little girls, and there were probably 6 or 7 of these kids, all huge and tall in our minds. One of them pretended something was behind us and gasped, saying, "Oh my God, look." And we turned around, which was when they stole all our money. When we started kind of tearing up and asking for our money, one of the kids got right up in my face and pretended to start a car whenever I talked. He would turn the key and make a loud engine revving sound, as if he was starting a car, but he did it really loudly right in my face while the other guys laughed. Finally, they left after pouring all our lemonade on the grass. It was so scary, and we ran home and hid in our room crying, "Justice." Luckily, my dad, who is super ripped, wasn't having any of it. He walked around the neighborhood until he found the punks eating chips and candy they bought, probably with our money. He got right up in their faces, grabbed one kid by the collar, bumped chests with some of them, and then somehow took their money like they did to us. My dad is my hero. Back in my college days, I used to drink quite a bit on the weekends and Thursday nights. One Thursday, as I was walking home from the bars, I decided to throw my thumb out to passing cars, asking for a quick hitch to my apartment about 3/4 of a mile down the street. A white lifted Dodge 3500 pickup pulled over and he reached over and pulled the door handle from the inside, flinging the door open for me. I hopped in. We talked for a couple of minutes, asking where I lived, what my roommates were like, and things like that. I now realize he was gauging whether they'd know I would be home that night or not. And as we pulled up to my apartment, I informed him this was my stop. He informed me in no uncertain terms that, "No, this is not your stop," and I immediately realized I was about to be kidnapped, beaten, or worse by this guy. He hit the lock button, locking the doors. At this point, I was thinking, "Hell no, not tonight, you jerk." And as he was flooring the accelerator through a red light at my apartment's intersection, I unlocked my door, opened it, and tucked and rolled my way out of there. He sped off. I bolted towards home. He made a U-turn at the next opportunity and headed back in my direction. I ducked into some bushes as he tried to brush me or hit me with his truck, and then he was gone. I didn't get his license plate and, being a drunk college kid, didn't report it to the police. I wonder if my escape made him bolder and more aggressive toward future abductees. Scary as hell to think about, and I'm shaking typing this out on my phone. This was in 2005. Last winter, I began to run seriously and wanted to stick to a schedule, so that sometimes meant running at night or early in the morning when it was dark out. I started wearing a bright yellow jacket because I was paranoid about being hit by a car in the dark. One chilly night, I was running through a nearby neighborhood when a blue Mustang slowed down next to me. Initially, I didn't think too much of it because I could have coincidentally been running in front of their house as they were pulling in. Instead of stopping, the car matched my pace and the window rolled down. I decided against stopping to talk to the person and just kept running, which I think they were not expecting since it took them several moments to speak up. Out on a run, the person inside was a middle-aged man, from what I could judge by his voice. It was a slow, low drawl. I couldn't see his face in the dark, though. "Yeah," I said. He still matched my pace. "You getting cold?" he asked. "Nope," I said, and he finally drove off. The encounter was short and on paper is not particularly disturbing, but it really messed with my head. When he started speaking, I immediately felt spooked and realized it was after dark and I was about 1.5 miles from home. I enjoy running because I feel proud of how powerful and resilient my body is, but the possibility of being snatched by a man who was clearly bigger and stronger than me while being quite a ways from home made me feel small and helpless. I finished my run and kept an eye out for the car in case he stuck around, but I didn't see him. It made me so mad that I wasn't able to pursue my health and hobby in peace, all because some people can't control themselves. I was also frustrated that my yellow jacket, which was intended to keep me safe, probably made me stick out to him. And finally, I was scared because of the very real possibility that I could be kidnapped and or attacked while out by myself. I was walking on a well-groomed, well-traveled trail with my Chihuahua at about 3 p.m. I noticed a car parked nearby in a long parking lot near a school field used for lacrosse. I smiled to myself, as they were parked near a very difficult geocache that had stumped my husband and me many times before we found it. I assumed they were there for the cache. I crossed the street to continue the trail past their location. At this point, the trail goes straight for a bit along the parking lot, then heads into the woods for a while. It also splits and circles around a large hill, with forest on 2 sides. Despite the suburban area and the fact that it's well populated, when you're behind the hill, no one can see you from any side, as the forest and the hill itself make it completely secluded. As I passed the car, they pulled forward and parked right where the trail hits the woods, and I saw the driver get out. I thought it was odd but kept going. I was heading behind the hill, anyway. I was able to see the driver in the woods, a distance away, where the car had pulled over. Not long after, my dog started looking behind him and growling. I thought, holy crap, this guy is following me. I yanked my earbuds out, gripped my phone in my hand, turned around, and said, "What?" in my most pissed off, intimidating voice. As a petite woman, I can be pretty forward. He was literally feet behind me, meaning he would have had to book it through the woods to catch up. He stopped and, in broken English, asked if there was a fishing lake nearby to bring his kids to. I was taken aback and, like an idiot, pointed in the direction of a huge natural area nearby. He then asked me to show him on a map and pointed to his car, which had backed up to the split in the trail where I had turned. Since I knew the guy following me had previously been driving, I realized they had also switched drivers. I told him no, and we just stood and stared at each other. Then, he took a giant step toward me, and I took a giant step backward. More silent standoff. Finally, he just turned around and left. I ran faster than I've ever run to get around the hill and into public view. I called the police as soon as I got home. They took my story very seriously, including placing officers near the scene and cutting trees to widen the view of the trail where it enters the woods. There wasn't much they could do about the visibility behind the hill. They told me they felt I had been watched walking for a while and the men were waiting for me to get out of public view. They even suggested that the men had seen me walking the trail on other days, which I did pretty predictably. Ladies, don't walk with earbuds in, and stay aware of your surroundings. My boyfriend and I decided to go bar hopping one night a few years ago. We live in a college town, so usually it's packed. However, this winter night's weather was so nasty and uncomfortable, combined with it being a school holiday, made the whole area pretty deserted. Little did we know a lot of the bars and restaurants were actually closed too. The whole setting was very eerie. So as we were walking, trying to find a warm bar to duck into, we passed a man with his hood drawn. He was literally the first person we had seen out and about. There was nothing immediately alarming about him, but I was suddenly hit with a terrible gut feeling. I whispered as much to my boyfriend after we had passed him. He had gotten about a block in the other direction when he stopped and let out this animal-like howling/screaming noise. I will never forget that sound. We both spun to see him hunched over holding something dark but shiny. To me, it looked like a knife. My boyfriend would later say he thought it was a gun. That's when this guy started charging us, screaming as he ran. At the time, I was in good shape and had trained in various martial arts for about 14 years. So I immediately applied my training. I ran like hell. I grabbed my boyfriend's hand to make sure he was with me, but he had already had the same thought. We sprinted down the sidewalk, frantically looking for an open bar or restaurant, but everything was closed for the holiday. So I had an idea to run toward this one diner that is open 24/7 and notorious for being constantly open. After what felt like forever but was actually more like 8 to 10 minutes, we sprinted around a sharp corner and rushed into the diner, hiding behind the hostess desk. The whole door was glass, so we were able to peek out and watch as this man started searching for us outside. He looked crazed. I will never forget how animalistic he looked. We were able to tell a confused hostess to call the police, who had apparently already been looking for the man and were very close by. The man just paced around the block looking for us and screaming in frustration. It sounded like he was trying to say words, but it was just nonsense. The hostess locked the door and hid with us behind the podium/desk area. When the cops got there, it took 4 police officers to tackle and handcuff him. I never did find out what weapon he had or what he was on. The hostess gave us both a free chocolate milkshake though, so at least we had that going for us. Maybe not the scariest, but at the time I was terrified. I was 14 or 15, it was my freshman year of high school. I had recently been peer pressured by my older brother and his girlfriend at the time to let them give me a stick and poke tattoo on my ankle. Maybe like a week after I had done it, I was watching TV with my dad, who had drunk probably half a bottle of tequila, and I put my foot up on the coffee table not thinking about my new tattoo. He saw it and went ballistic. He chased me around the kitchen island until he caught me and strangled the hell out of me, kind of like the Bart Simpson strangle. Right as I thought I was going to pass out, he loosened his grip enough for me to break free. It was pretty scary. I asked him about it somewhat recently and he denies it ever happened.